All right, so today's tutorial is different from the other tutorials in the sense that today is the tutorial in which we discuss the essay. The essay is also on the topic that we're going to be covering in today's tutorial. So today is a little bit different to the other tutorials. This piece of the information on this paper will prove very useful for you, both for today's tutorial, but also for your actual essay assignment. So the idea right now is, rather than me sitting up here and reading these 300 words out to you out loud, and maybe it's more than 300, I don't know. We're going to take 5 minutes, and we're just going to have you guys read this. Okay? That's how we're going to start, and then we're going to return to some of the further exploration as well as discussion. So disregard this. We're not using this today. I'm going to turn it off. We're not using it. All right. So the main thing I'm going to say about your essay, you are welcome to attempt. You're welcome to attempt to argue that evolutionary and social explanations are in conflict or are at odds with one another. However, much of the purpose of this essay, from my perspective, is for you guys to gain what I see as an accurate understanding of the relationship between a social focus and evolutionary insights and evolutionary thinking. There are, with respect to the topics that you guys can choose, you're welcome to pick virtually any topic within a mating context. This right here, I focus on sex differences, or on mate preferences, and where mate preferences come from and how they're influenced by social factors, and how we can also increase our understanding of patterns of mate preferences through the use of an evolutionary theoretical perspective. When I say that, I fundamentally do not mean just thinking about what we already know and have observed in human mate preferences, and then trying to identify an after-the-fact evolutionary explanation for those preferences. That's not good science. That can be the first step of good science. That is, if I generate an explanation for evolutionarily where these patterns of mate preferences are coming from, that can become my hypothesis that I then test, or at least present to other researchers for testing in research. But, right, so, and what that is that's starting with observation, and then it's using an observation to work our way towards a theoretical idea. Crucially, though, that theoretical idea must be testable and ideally tested. But that's far from where an evolutionary perspective or an evolutionary approach, that's the scope of an evolutionary approach goes well beyond that. Often we can do the opposite, which is we start by thinking about evolutionary pressures, problems that our human ancestors would have faced for many, many millennia, many millennia ago. And when I'm talking about that, I'm not talking about 10,000 years ago, I'm not talking about 5,000 years ago, I'm talking about 500,000 years ago. I'm talking about the time period. For you guys, you can think about it from 500,000 years ago to 50,000 years ago. I suspect that most of you guys have not spent much time thinking about what the world would have been like for humans during that time, right? Because we are taught that ancient refers to ancient civilizations, which are only a couple thousand years old. From an evolutionary perspective, on a geological timescale, those things are babies. There's nothing ancient about them at all. Not only are they not ancient, but they also were very temporary. They did not last very long over the course of human evolution. And when something in evolution lasts for only a short period of time, it doesn't actually have meaningful effects on evolutionarily relevant outcomes. So from my perspective, the main purpose of this is for you to engage in an exercise where you are self-teaching the compatibility of social influences on mate preferences and the evolved information processing design of the psychological mechanisms that produce those preferences. Here's an example, and I don't think this is going to be in the other tutorials, but that's one of the benefits you guys get from being here, and fortunately I'm recording this for other people. I was at one point. I may not be anymore. Am I still recording? Yeah, I am. Good. Okay. So here's a great illustration of the compatibility of evolutionary and social explanations. So evolutionarily, let's compare two different environments. One environment in which there is an abundance of males and a shortcoming of, or a shortage of women. That is, what's called the sex ratio is female bias, or that is, there's more females than there are males. Let's compare that to an environment in which there are more females compared to males. Okay, you guys have been, right? So this is where you totally can transfer these ideas into your own social worlds and contexts. What happens when you're at the bar and there's one woman for every 10 guys? What do you observe? Just, and this is one of these things where you're not saying, oh, I know the evolutionary explanation for what I just saw. No, let me make an observation here, and then maybe I can work backward to a hypothesis about that. So what do you guys observe in an environment where there's 10 males for every 1 woman in a bar versus 2 women for every male?
Lots of free drinks.
In which one?
Well, there's 10 guys for 1 woman, so.
Okay. And let me ask, great, so lots of free drinks. So what does that mean from the perspective of a woman's psychology? Does she get to be more picky? Does, right? Okay, so here, totally, right? So from an evolutionary perspective, you would expect this, though. You'd expect female choosiness to increase as the number of available male suitors increases. And what about male psychology? What do you think is going to be happening over there? Say it?
Competitiveness.
Yeah, okay, increased competition. Okay, and so there's probably going to be between male competition, and as you pointed out, although you guys might not think about a man buying a woman a free drink, that's a form of investment. It's not a major investment, but it is actually bestowal of resources upon the female. Okay, so and all 3 of those things are variables that we happen to observe in modern social environments, but what we're seeing there is we're seeing an influence of what's called the operational sex ratio. That is the ratio of available females to the ratio of available males. If we say, so then if we go back to an evolutionary starting point, we say, okay, how would we have expected the differences in that ratio across tribes or across situations, across evolutionary time to have influenced male and female mating psychology? We would expect evolutionarily for the mechanisms that are responsible for female and male mate preferences to be sensitive to that ratio, and to be choosier, if from the perspective of a woman, to be choosier if there's a greater number of males available relative to a scarcity of males. For males, for between male competition to increase, and for male investment to increase. And for the opposite effects to occur when the ratio flips in the other direction. Okay, so those hypotheses are generated from an evolutionary perspective, but the fact is what they are evolutionarily informed statements about how the structure and composition of the social environment is going to influence human mating psychology. It's not, is it evolved or is it socially constructed? That's an ill-conceived question, right? An evolutionary perspective generates predictions about exactly which aspects of the social environment are going to serve as inputs into these psychological mechanisms. So that is, in this case, the operational sex ratio was an evolutionarily relevant variable. Do men tend to wear more brown leather shoes than black leather shoes when the operational sex ratio changes? A, no idea. B, there's no evolutionarily generatable prediction in that context. Right? So the idea is not simply that any evolutionary hypothesis can generate a prediction about any possible aspect of the social environment, but rather really what's happening there is that an evolutionary perspective can guide exactly what facets of the social environment we expect to be important. And that's a key idea. Is that there's tons of variables in the social environment. You could talk about everything from the shape of the lights to the surface of the floor. Those are all aspects of the environment that these people are in, whether the women have their hair done to the right side or left side. All of those things are aspects of the social environment. None of them are important. Why are none of them important? None of them were evolutionarily relevant. So in contemporary modern times, our minds are not designed to process any information from the social environment. Our minds are designed to process specific information from the social environment. And for us to understand which specific information our minds are designed to process, we have to think evolutionarily. So that's where evolution is really informing social psychology. It's not a matter of them being in conflict with one another. I'm going to make the full slide deck available to you. Continue to return to this. So this is intentionally topic-free, right? This is all theoretical in the sense that I don't cite any specific studies looking, for example, at how cross-culturally, that is across cultures, men tend to seek a woman who is younger in age than he is, whereas women tend to seek a long-term partner who is older in age than she is. Those are the kinds of findings, though, that are in the mate preference literature. in the essay prompt that is both in the unit guide and which I'll talk about in just a moment, I get you started with 3 different articles. I highly recommend that you guys read the excerpts from those articles, and then what you can do is you can use the reference lists from those articles to find other articles. So in other words, you want to use each article that you read as a seed for growing branches on your project.
Can we use them though in our reference list for our own essays, or we should stick away from them?
Which ones are you referring to? When you're talking about the references
Like
that are in?
Like for our actual essay, so you gave us 3 to start off with.
To start with.
Can we use like things from them?
Yes,
in our
absolutely.
essay?
You absolutely yes. I suspect that everyone will have in their references sections those 3 papers
Okay.
in addition to others.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So your essay, and I'm going to make all this available, but I just kind of want this to be informal and flowing between us. You always have this in multiple other locations. The essay is going to be worth 35% of your overall mark, meaningful portion of your overall score in this unit. It is the writing assignment. It is where I want to see you guys and your ability to be scholars, that is to read research articles that I am not going to be lecturing on, that are not coming to you in textbook format, and for you to integrate findings. All right, so the prompt, which is also in the unit guide, is discuss the roles of evolutionary, sociocultural, and other contextual factors in determining human mate preferences. If I told you guys, I'm trying to think of what study to use as yet another example. Sure, here's what we're going to go with, and this is some of the material that's covered in one of the papers. If I told you that across different contexts, how much value a person or a group of people places on others' physical attractiveness specifically, as opposed to personality variables, attitudes, values, intelligence, etc., but the importance placed on that is, how important physical attractiveness is to me, I'll speak from my own perspective, varies across different contexts. And so people might see that and say, oh, that's because culture is causing it, or oh, it's because it's socially constructed. The problem with that is that that's an after-the-fact explanation that doesn't really explain anything. I don't feel like I know anything more at that point. So what we're gonna sort of flip it on its head and say, okay, culture can't be an explanation. Rather, culture, or these differences, either across individuals, within individuals, or between groups, are those differences themselves are something to be explained. And in one sense, how important I see physical attractiveness, that is, how important physical attractiveness is in determining how attracted I am overall to a potential partner, that is a mate preference in a certain sense. Keep that in mind. We're going to jump into something else about it, though. What happens when you get a skin infection? What happens to your skin? Does it stay nice and smooth? No, it doesn't. Raise your hand if you think people look more physically attractive when they have skin infections. Okay. Raise your hand if you think people in general look more physically attractive when they don't have skin infections. Okay, good. We've got some reasonable consensus there. All right. Raise your hand if you think the likelihood of getting a skin infection varies across geographic regions of this world. Great. Okay, that's truthful, that's knowledgeable. All right, so what evolutionarily informed scientists did is they said, let's think about this for a second. So skin infections can lead to skin blemishes, scars, other visual cues to the fact that an individual has their skin has either failed to withstand an infection, or that they've been exposed to an environment that has lots and lots of potential for skin infections, but somehow their body has managed to maintain this incredibly good complexion. So what does that say about someone? If you went, let's say, you go, what's a place that has like really high rates of insect bites? Okay, let's go with a specific country. Even if it's not true, we'll just work with it for the name of the example. As long as we all think it, even if it's wrong. Let's go with let's just go with like the middle of the Amazon. I think there are pretty wild things in the middle of the Amazon. If you went into the middle of the Amazon and you saw a woman there who looked like she was like photoshopped straight out of like an Estee Lauder advertisement or something like that, what would you think? Would you think that she'd never been bitten by an insect? Would you conclude that there's probably something special about that woman's genes or something about her biological composition such that she's the only person in her tribe that has this perfect skin, whereas other people are scratching their body, they clearly have had many different insect bites, etc. You guys see where I'm going with this? Okay, now on the other hand, what if you went to Scandinavia? Let's go with Norway or Sweden, for example. I picked that example because I swear, like, Swedish people have perfect skin. Like there are no first. What's that?
Everything's perfect.
Yeah, right. Everything's perfect there, right? Including the fact that there are far fewer ectoparasites, which means things that are on your skin as parasites. There are far fewer of them. So if you compared the woman in the Amazon's perfect complexion to the woman in Norway or Sweden's perfect complexion, would you think that the perfect complexion meant the same thing in the two different places? No, it doesn't, right? It means much more in the environment where there's greater numbers of parasites. Okay, so with all this information in hand, these evolutionary scientists, and you'll have the chance to read about this because I describe it in one of the 3 articles, they generated the evolutionarily informed hypothesis that how much importance individuals place on potential mates' physical appearance and physical attractiveness is going to increase as the number of parasites, or what gets called pathogen prevalence, as the number of parasites increases. That is, in environments where there's a greater threat of these bites, people are going to value clear skin more than they do in places where there aren't these insect bites. Does that make sense so far? Awesome. And guess what? The correlation is like 0.9. The correlation between how much people in different cultures place on physical appearance in determining an individual's overall mate value, it's much, much greater in environments where there's lots and lots of these parasites, lots of these things attacking our skin, for example. Does that mean that there's no cultural explanation? No, it's not. That the whole idea there is this integration of evolutionary thinking with cultural differences. So that could be a topic that you guys pick up. There's lots and lots of different topics that you guys can pick. All right, so here's what your essays have to do. And again, I'm going to make these slides available to you and the other students on Moodle or LMS. All right, your essay must answer the question through the use of research. You guys might think that my statement about it answering the question is a silly one. No, it needs to answer the question. And you'd be surprised how often I get papers that talk about a bunch of stuff, but they don't answer the question. They don't address the prompt. And the question is, really, what is the relationship between social and evolutionary explanations? In many ways, I'm telling you what it is, but you still have to show me that you understand it. Because you just telling it back to me, as I'm telling it to you now, that's not going to show me that you understand how these things are not just compatible, but how an evolutionary perspective can inform social psychological research. For those of you guys, if you're trying to take notes and you're anxious, I am recording this right now, and I'll make it available to you guys. Okay, so when I say through the use of research, I mean 2 different things. One is I mean not just the textbook. That's one thing I mean. The other thing I mean is I make a fundamental distinction between scholarly work, which can include philosophy papers, it can include literature review, it can include theoretical ideas or hypotheses, versus empirical, meaning evidence-based research. Your paper needs to have a backbone of evidence, backing up what it is that you guys are claiming. I can virtually assure you that if it is an unsubstantiated personal opinion, no matter how convincing the opinion might seem to be, if it's not backed by data, and when I say data, you don't have to be going to collect the data, but you have to be citing other research that has actually investigated some of these ideas. Your objective is to convince your reader that your point of view is correct. right? So you should not really be writing for me as an audience. You are writing for a reader. You are trying to persuade someone that does not currently have a position on this issue that your point of view is correct. And the only way for that to truly be convincing, psychology is a science, these are the psychological sciences, is by providing evidence. So I link you to three different papers, 3 different articles. The first one is one where I talk about, yes, I happen to be the first author of this. It's a paper that got published in American Psychologist. To toot my own horn a little bit, that's not the purpose of this, but American Psychologist is who's heard of APA? Okay, so APA is the American Psychological Association. I guess there's also the Australian Psychological Association. But APA, American Psychological Association, that's the association that determines the formatting that gets used in psychology. Anyhow, American Psychologist is their flagship journal. Has about a subscribership of about 130,000 psychologists. And so when you publish in this paper, it means it's going out to lots of people. The fact is that there was not in the literature a guide for how to appropriately conduct evolutionary research. That's really important, especially when there's so many misconceptions surrounding what evolutionarily informed psychological research is. For example, the whole term evolutionary psychology, I think that's misleading. I actually steer away from ever saying evolutionary psychology myself. And if I say it, outside of the saying that I don't say it, you guys should let me know, because you'll hear me say evolutionarily informed, an evolutionary perspective, evolutionary insights, things like that. Because when you say evolutionary psychology, sounds like there's developmental psychology, cognitive psychology, social psychology, evolution. That's not the same level. It's kind of like if I said, okay, apple, orange, pear, fruit. Right? You can't do that. It's not in the same category as the others. Rather, fruit is something under which the other 3 fall. In this case, you can investigate topics in social psychology, like we're doing, using an evolutionary perspective. You can investigate topics in cognitive psychology, topics in developmental psychology using evolutionary insights. Okay, this paper that just got published in American Psychologist addresses some of these issues for psychologists around the world. In the 5 pages that I link you guys to directly, I talk about, my co-authors and I talk about these cross-cultural differences and the importance placed on individual's physical attractiveness in determining how desirable overall they are as a mate. Okay, so it walks you through about 6 pages of that research and how that works both culturally and evolutionarily. I do encourage you to read the whole article. It's pretty long though, so I say read these 6 pages for sure. The second paper discusses it's David Buss's paper from 1989, and what it talks about are differences between men and women in mate preferences across, if I recall correctly, 37 different cultures in 33 different countries. Okay, and so you might write if culture and these social influences are determining our mate preferences, irrespective of how evolution has shaped the human mind to operate in social environments, and we would never expect to see the results we do, which is that across basically all known cultures, women, for example, in long-term mates prefer males who have the potential to acquire resources and invest in them and their offspring, whereas males have preferences in long-term mates for women who are younger than them. That paper, those 14 pages, get into a bunch of that different stuff. And then the last article, it's a pretty sophisticated article. Not that you guys aren't capable of reading a sophisticated article, but in terms of its relevance for this, I actually just highlight 1 page. And that 1 page that I highlight shows how, I've essentially plagiarized here. Most of this is actually a plagiarization of my own article. But if we look at this second to last paragraph, where it says, there are persuasive arguments that an evolutionary starting point of sex differences in reproductive biology, that applies to humans, should lead to gender-specific cultural norms. So it's showing how culture can evolve, how what you guys think of as biological evolution can lead to cultural phenomena. All right, so those are going to be your starting point, and then have fun. You guys have, 10 weeks to, or I guess maybe 8 weeks before your essays due, something like that. Yes, the point is you guys have a lot of time to delve into this literature, which is why I'm trying to give you guys this prompt early in the semester. There are a couple of slides that will be available to you on Moodle that give general overviews of how an introduction of an essay should look, and then how a body of an essay should look. I don't know if I just said that right. How an introduction to an essay should look, how the body of an essay should look. Those are not nearly as valuable. This is my slideshow stuck. Hold on one sec. There we go. Those slides are not nearly as valuable to you as the page that is in the unit guide that talks about section weightings for essay. You guys know what I'm talking about? Okay, so some of you do, which means that all of you have it. Refer to that. It walks you through what an effective attack to this question is, what a successful strategy is going to look like. It's going to help you not get derailed. It's always dangerous because students often they have something in their mind, and to them it kind of feels vaguely relevant to the paper. This guide is designed to help you not put those things in, because if something feels vaguely relevant, you're kind of like rolling dice. You're like, oh, I kind of felt relevant, let's see how it goes. But really it could be a bad distraction to the reader. Okay, so that thing walks you through exactly how an essay should be structured to be effective in its persuasiveness. There are also there are 3 different resources. I believe all of them are listed in your unit guide, but again, I'm going to make this presentation as well as these slides available to you. But the authors are Burton, O'Shea, and Findley. You're welcome to obtain those books. The library, I don't know how many of you guys will end up consulting those. My strongest recommendation, for 2 reasons, is to work with the section weightings for essays, sections weighting for the essay that's in the unit guide. First of all, it's something that I personally generated. It took me a while, especially to get it on one page. The other thing is that it is one page, which means that it's like something that all of you guys can have in hand, and you can be checking your essay to make sure that it measures up against those standards. Okay, referencing. So I'm going to try to fly through this stuff because it's not all that interesting. Referencing. So if you're presenting an idea that is not your own, you need to acknowledge the source of that idea. Do not be excessive in your quotes. And when I say quotes, I'm not talking about you describing someone else's idea. I'm talking about you cutting and pasting their text and then putting it in quotes. Okay, so I don't. Often a good essay will have 0 of those. Very rarely is it necessary to actually quote someone. Okay, often quoting either is a reflection of the writer being lazy or the writer not understanding what the original author was actually trying to say. Okay, and then you'll need to have a references section. Your whole essay needs to be formatted according to APA style. One thing that's not in this, I was a bit surprised to see that not everybody is familiar with APA style. I'll make mention of this website. There's a website called the Purdue OWL. Purdue is spelled P-U-R-D-U-E. P-U-R-D-U-E, and then OWL, all in caps, O-W-L. So what the Purdue OWL is, well, the Purdue OWL offers many different resources, but the Purdue OWL offers essentially a digital and organized equivalent to the APA manual, which is like a 250-page book, which is a good resource, but I find it much, you guys are definitely of the internet age where it's like type in a search term, find the thing that you're looking for, as opposed to looking through the table of contents, trying to find a page number, going there, realizing it's not the right thing, so you go back to the table of contents. Right. So I personally only use the Purdue OWL. I have a copy of the APA manual, but I use the Purdue OWL. Plagiarism. Don't do it. And you will submit what's called an Erkin report. Have you guys had those so far? Yeah, okay, so you guys will need to submit one of those. I highly recommend that you, I'm hoping to have you guys have the opportunity to submit once before submitting to me. That is, you submit essentially a test through Erkin so you can see the kind of report you'd be getting, so that if there is plagiarism, that you did without even knowing it, or if you aren't sure. First of all, if you aren't sure, that probably means you plagiarized, so fix it. But if you're sure that you didn't, and then you have a chance to run it through Irken to see what kind of report that I get, that could be useful. The other thing is that it's not based on numbers. So I had a student who once said, my Irken report only had a 1% result. And then I went back through and I said, well, yeah, it had a 1% result because, and this was the equivalent, like the sentence that was copied was something like, in the category of fruit, comma, there are apples, oranges, and pears. And what this person had done is said, there are pears, apples, and oranges in the fruit category. And Irken can't see that match. I can. I think you guys could too. Of course, and it's not about fruit and stuff, but like if you guys are talking about cross-cultural differences in make preferences in the study by Gangestad and Buss in 1993, and you were reporting their results, it's going to be obvious. All right, so you're going to have a cover sheet, and I learned as I came into this room that LMS automatically creates one for you if you take it off. You do need to have an APA formatted title page, which obviously will include a title. Your essay, follow the section weightings guide, and a reference list and the Irken report. Your word count. I actually wrote to my closest colleague this morning who was apologizing to me for being very terse, and I was like, no, it's great. Like, I understood everything you said, and you used 7 words. I say that brevity is beauty. I have no idea who had the ill-conceived idea of having word count minimums for student papers. That is like phenomenally the worst idea. I guess maybe when you're 7 and somebody's like, what'd you do today? And they're like, I went to school. I ate a banana. I went home. And they say, no, we want to know more detail. Maybe you needed to say, okay, we need more words than that at that point. No, I want you guys to get all of this stuff across using a maximum of 2,000 words. Okay? Refer to the unit guide, I believe. So this is, you can't quote me on this. You need to quote the unit guide, but I believe it's the 27th of October at 5 p.m. is the deadline for submission for this. Do me a favor and don't create the back. There's one thing that students should never do, except under circumstances that justify this, and that is after the deadline passes, they ask for an extension. Now, if you were in a coma in a hospital, or you were lost at sea when the deadline passed, that would be an appropriate circumstance in which to say, hey, can I have an extension? But you put me in a really, really, really impossibly difficult position when you let the deadline pass and then ask for an extension. Of course, even if you do ask for an extension before the deadline, 2 things about that. Rarely do I get submissions that are coming from students who've asked for an extension where the essay or the assignment is quite good. So often if you're asking for an extension, it means you've procrastinated. So if you're anticipating a situation where you're going to need an extension, avoid that. Know that as soon as possible so that you don't end up needing the extension. Does that make sense? Because if I give you an extra 2 days, that probably means you're only using those 2 days because you probably haven't written anything up until that point. It's probably not going to be a very high quality essay. That said, of course, I am not going to, if under a justified circumstance someone does get an extension, I'm of course not going to say, oh, they got an extension, the paper must therefore be bad. Hello?
Is it cartoon studies?
Did you say cartoon studies?
Cartoon.
No, okay. No, it is not. What room are you looking for?
Cartoon studies.
Do you know what room number though?
I cannot. Next door back isn't the.
So this is room 1.033 in building 440.
Okay, thank you.
Good luck.
Just on the essay, it doesn't say the 27th of August, it says week 13 and then 4 5 p.m.
Are you in the unit guide?
I am,
Okay, when did you print that one?
uh,
This is not a, right, this is,
Printed it today.
and it's there, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so, yeah, you should, I asked that question not because it's like, oh, you did the wrong thing. No, you probably were a very diligent student who printed it early, and then I had another student who said, what date is that? And so you could say, okay, well, what's week 13? What's the Friday? And look at the academic calendar. That's a great thing, and I'll put it on, I'll say this verbally. I recommend that you guys, whenever you have a question about the unit guide, awesome if you have a printed copy, but things like that, when students ask me for clarification, the unit guide that is available on LMS is something I'm actually updating when things like that come in. So it says 27th of October, is that correct?
No, it only says week 13. I printed it just before I came on.
So I think you guys are probably in the assessment section. If you guys have the actual week to week, it will show the information. Yes, right, so yes, and so that part in the unit guide that's available now indicates October 27th. Yeah.
Does the word count include an abstract or?
You actually don't have to have an abstract in this case. I like the concepts of abstracts, but no, in this case, don't do an abstract. And the reason I'm going to say don't do an abstract is because for a research report, you would have an introduction, method, results, and then a discussion, and an abstract sort of provides an overview of that. In this case, you don't have those different sections. All right. We're going to use the last 10 minutes of this. By the way, do you guys have units at 12:30? Raise your hand. You have to be somewhere at 12:30. Okay. You guys are welcome to skip out. Again, I'm recording this. The next stuff that we're going to cover is just to get you guys thinking. So I've talked about cross-cultural differences in the importance placed on physical attractiveness. I've talked about a female mate preference for men who indicate cues of the ability to acquire resources and a willingness to invest those in a woman and her offspring. We've talked about how a woman's choosiness can increase. We've talked about lots of stuff, but we can keep going. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. If you do have units, feel free to step out. This stuff, again, is just to get you guys thinking, and I will make these slides available on LMS for you to review at your convenience. All right, we're going to start with the familiarity principle. Okay? Don't write this down. No, don't write this down. You guys, no writing. No writing. We just want to talk. It's just to get, because the more you write, the less that's actually happening up here. Right? This is an exercise in you guys generating ideas, not just taking notes on them. All right, so I'm going to read this to you. The mere exposure effect is a psychological phenomenon wherein people develop a preference for something simply because they're familiar with it. In social psychology, this effect is sometimes called the familiarity principle. This effect has been demonstrated across a range of things, which include words, Chinese characters, paintings, pictures of faces, geometric figures, and sounds. Also, in studies of interpersonal attraction, the more frequently someone sees you or you see someone, on average, in general, the more pleasing and likable that person ends up being in your mind, simply by virtue of that frequent exposure. Why, evolutionarily, would it have been beneficial for you to experience increased attraction towards someone simply because you saw them more? That's what I want you guys to talk about in your groups. Why, evolutionarily, would being familiar with someone and seeing them frequently, why would it have been beneficial to be attracted to them as opposed to, right, so I could put the question mark there, or I could add this part, which is as opposed to people that you are not familiar with. Talk about that in your groups. 60 seconds.
I'm sure that like other plans and have those days quite different and just
I want you guys to keep going. If someone wasn't familiar to you, what was that probably telling you about them? Think about that. Keep talking. If you encountered someone that wasn't familiar, I heard, yeah.
when you don't know directly right.
So it's just that point where it's very there.
All right, so that's one thing, right? So we're going to keep going, right? So familiarity increases perception, interpersonal attraction, and interpersonal relationships. I like it. No, that's good. I want you guys to keep churning. That's good. That's what I want. Right. So again, this is just like this observation we make from social psychology, but then we can start to think evolutionarily about this. My view, if I were to provide an answer, an explanation or hypothesis about why that phenomenon exists. Not being familiar with someone in ancestral environments almost certainly was a cue to them being a member of a different tribe. Now, often tribes would have been in conflict. In fact, almost always they would have been in conflict for resources. That doesn't mean that they necessarily would have been engaging in physical combat, but the fact is that resources in an environment are finite, they're limited, and if there's multiple groups that both want a set of resources, they're in competition or conflict. Now, often being in conflict, being in competition with one another does lead to conflict. So encountering someone from a different tribe, which is probably what being not familiar with them meant, could have, at a minimum, it could have meant that they were coming from a tribe that's in competition with your group. On the other hand, if they're familiar, that probably means that they're a member of your own tribe. It probably means that they've already been vetted, that is like checked out by your male and female relatives to make sure that they're okay. That is, if you've encountered them on many occasions. I could keep going. The point is, this very simple seeming social psychological phenomenon, there are reasonable and clear evolutionary reasons for us to think, oh yeah, that would be a strong reason why the human mind would have evolved to interpret familiarity as something that should result in increased attraction. Jumping from topic to topic, so you guys can have an understanding of the different topics to which you can apply this essay. All right, here we go. Previous mate preferences studies indicate that people prefer partners whose personalities are kind and trustworthy but not dominant. However, that research is left unclear whether these traits describe the behavior, that is, kind, trustworthy, and not dominant, whether that refers to the behavior a partner is directing towards the perceiver, towards other classes of people, or both. Now, because the consequences of an individual's or partner's behaviors would have differed depending on whether you were the recipient of it or it was directed at somebody else, these researchers predicted that mate preferences for different personality trait levels would change depending on which individual the partner was directing these behaviors at. Okay, so thinking socially, in what situations do you think women would be attracted to men who exhibit high levels of kindness? In what social situations do you think women are going to be attracted to men who exhibit high levels of kindness? Other women's children? Right? And the reason you say, and there's an evolutionary reason for that no. Right. Okay, we're going to keep rolling. All right. In what situations do you think women do not desire men who behave dominantly? Right. When you are the recipient of the dominance, you don't like that. However, do you think you like it when a heterosexual woman or in women in general are attracted to men who are dominant when they're in the context of other males? Yeah, right? So it's not that women like dominance. You can't, that statement just is too simple to be accurate. It's not accurate because you said it. It's that they don't want the dominance directed at them, but they like the dominance when it's in that other social context. So here's a question. Are we thinking evolutionarily? Yes, we are. Are we also seeing how different social environments are serving as inputs into these evolved mate preference mechanisms, and then they're changing the preferences, right? So what's happening is we're seeing differences across social situations in line with the social emphasis, but those differences, they are patterned in a way that reflects our evolved psychology. All right? Okay, jumping to our last topic of the day, just to leave this with you. All right. On Valentine's Day, America's leading authority on philanthropy announced that real estate mogul, this is a few years ago, Donald Trump, had pledged $1 million to charity. A few years earlier, media tycoon Ted Turner had pledged an entire $1 billion to humanitarian causes. While such valiant spectacles of philanthropy are fairly common, they seem a bit puzzling from an evolutionary perspective. Trump and Turner, for example, epitomize many people's stereotypes of self-interested, self-serving capitalist. Both men appear to obtain great satisfaction from lavish lifestyles and openly flaunt their extravagant private jets, the luxurious yachts, and chauffeured limousines, and their position as president. Yet each of these seemingly selfish tycoons chose to give away a phenomenal amount of their own money to complete strangers. What motives might underlie such costly and apparently selfish deeds? Okay, here we go, 60 seconds. What social situations do you think lead men to display seemingly self-sacrificial behavior?
I say Iceland.
Great, you're already there, right? You're already there. There's this function to it behind it. And we can now, do women do the same thing to the same extent?
We have the same.
It also kind of depends on the nature of self-sacrifice, right? So a man doing something that is physically dangerous to are there as many female firefighters as there are male firefighters? Okay, I'm not gonna say anything more about that. All right, jumping to the next one. In what social situations do you think women display or engage in self-sacrificial behavior?
Children.
Say again?
Parenting?
Okay, parenting. Yep, although is we can get into whether parenting. So when someone's parenting, they are helping their own genetic relative, right? Which means that they're helping another vehicle that carries their own genes. We're going to get into a whole thing on helping and cooperation and altruism at a certain point. All right, here let me tell you what these what was found. All right, and this is how we're going to wrap it up. Among women, mating goals, so getting them to think about mating goals resulted in an increase in helping behavior, but only if that helping behavior was publicly observable, right? Donald Trump doesn't donate $1 million and not tell anyone. Ted Turner tells, he's like, look, I've got billions of dollars, right? Look how it's a display of his money, okay? Women's helping behavior increased only if it was publicly observable. Helping behavior did not increase among women if the helping was unknown to social others. Among men, mating goals, again, inducing the mating contexts, induced more helpfulness, but only in situations that enabled the men to display heroism or dominance. The conclusion being that romantic motives produce highly strategic and sex-specific self-presentations that are best understood within an evolutionary signaling framework. All right, you guys are out of here. 20 seconds to go. See you later.